Everybody just wants to move on.
Mm.
Why can't we just move on and put it all behind us? What's wrong with that?
Well, I think that for certain people that we can want to move forward, maybe they don't see that there's any problems that are happening at the moment. So actually, why is everyone questioning anything? Why are people kind of making a big deal about something? We've just moved on. Things to do with COVID was from a couple of years back. So why are we still there? Certain other people, I think the psychological aspect of starting to see there are some problems and mistakes were made, or maybe deliberate things were hidden from us. We've seen the unethical use of psychology being used in behavioral science. And I think people want to move on because actually we don't really want to acknowledge what's happened. I think that is a huge part. What does it mean if I accept that I was lied to, or I was given misinformation by the kind of parental figures? Because in sort of my kind of world, I often think that the government is the father figure, the NHS is the mother figure. What happens if we feel the parental figures in our life didn't tell us all of the truth? And I think that's a very destabilizing process for many people. So I think that it is often an easy defense mechanism to say, let's just move forward, forget about that. We don't need to. But from my perspective, you have to learn from the past, otherwise you're going to repeat the future. And that's just my clinical stuff. I've got to look at someone suffering today, and actually, is that psychologically connected to their past lived experiences? And often it is.
And that brings quite close, Jane, to the point that you had mentioned previously about what lessons can we learn from South Africa in terms of truth and reconciliation. How does that work?
Well, many people may remember, but in South Africa, after the apartheid, Archbishop Desmond Tutu set up a commission called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that was specifically a process where all the stakeholders, everybody could come and be heard and acknowledge each other. And I think maybe this kind of process would be really, really helpful from where we're at now, because it isn't about attaching blame or pursuing people. Some individuals may be taking that course of action, but more generally, it is about accepting a situation and hearing everybody as to where they are at, where they were at, and very specifically, as Christian says, making sure we don't go there again. In my work as a mediator, many of the times the people say, what I really want is for this not to happen again, and specifically not to happen to someone else again. And I think these are very important lessons for us to learn. So mediation is always a process of, I had to go through that, but I would really like to learn for myself and enable others to learn from that process.
But what would be going through the minds of the people who are in that position to make that step? Because, I mean, people are people, Christian. When we're faced with challenging situations, we ourselves personally don't want to go down that route. So we will naturally hesitate. Is that where political and scientific leadership is? Are they looking at self-preservation?
I don't know. And I think that's the bit I find that it's very difficult to get into the understanding and the mind of other people without knowing them. But it feels as if there was a stalling for time for a long while, which is why we saw so much censorship. Now, is there something else going on? Potentially, because I think there is going to be a lot of needing to self-preservate. I think that you get to a point where you have to make a decision on certain things, which is, do I double down, or do I start to kind of listen to the other side more? And I think those are kind of, when you're looking at conflict in terms of escalation, it's where are we going to go? Are we going to go up and keep escalating, or actually are we going to come down? And I think that might be where we're at the moment. What is the strategy of leaders now? Are we going to keep going along with the narrative, or are we now going to put in certain mitigation? Are we going to see certain admissions of some kind of fault. Maybe they're just small bits, but is it a drip feed onto a bigger bit? I don't know. But it's an interesting thing, because as you say, people are people, and you know, we often find it very difficult to admit when there have been failures or whatever, or we've got it wrong. People often don't want to lose face. But also then you've got the bigger picture, and Jane, in your roles that you've had, you'll know that this is also going to be about big companies and, you know, government responses, and there's been a lot of money being pumped into this industry. So where does that take us as well? So there has to be those aspects that are taken into account of people's decisions. So even though it is driven by people, I think there are far bigger issues and stakeholders inside the process of escalation or de-escalation. Can I say something just then as well? Because I think, you know, we're talking about some really, really fundamental emotional words. We've talked about fear and shame and guilt. And they are huge drives to make people change their behaviors. And that's known. You know, the behavioral scientists of the world know that you can use those three aspects to get people to change their behavior. So this is another reason why people don't want to move away from the narrative, because they were nudged into thinking a certain way. Be very afraid. Don't kill your granny. You know, you will feel guilty if you do this. There was a promotion of using social disapproval. I remember kind of authority figures saying, yes, we want to shame people into, you know, mask wearing and things like that. And these are the knock-on effect. The things that we're talking about now are the knock-on effects that are known when you use unethical psychology on the population, that there's going to be longer-term problems. You might get short-term fixes. You might get someone to change their behavior short-term, but longer-term, there's huge consequences. And now one of those consequences is exactly what we're just saying, and Jane kind of reiterated, is, well, the authority figures who are supposed to protect me, what's going on here now? I don't want to believe that. I don't want to see it. So there is a big part of the population who would not want to accept that something was done to them, that they were hoodwinked or things like that. So I think this is a really complicated area, and the psychology of it is really important. But as I'm even sitting here, I can feel myself self-censoring for fear of what's the repercussions for me for just speaking my truth. And I've been someone who's talked out quite a lot, but it's that. So then that goes back to Jane's point, which is there is also then, once you start to look and you start to acknowledge, oh, wow, okay, do I then just shut up and move on? Do I become someone that just wants to go along with the rest of the world now, forget about what I've just seen because now I'm scared? And this to me is really tricky, because we don't know how this is going to play out. And as you said, are we at a position like in March 2020 when we don't think anything bad's going to happen? It's over there. It's another part of the world. It's not going to hit us. So everyone was thinking it'll be okay. Then bang, we're in a completely different world. Are we at another cusp, as you're kind of hinting at here? Could this be another real shift? And I don't know, but it feels we need to be exploring that. The scientists need to be looking and preparing, because if we can prepare for a problem, then we will be able to protect and make sure that people that do need the help get the help. So I've gone off on a tangent there, but I'm still fascinated that the three topics that I struggle with most in my clinical practice, well, mainly shame and guilt especially, and then fear, you know, when you've got health anxiety and all those aspects, they're huge. These three words have already emerged, and we're only sort of 30 minutes into talking.
Go ahead, Jane. Yes.
I was going to say, I suppose I have a question of Christian, actually, is that if we don't acknowledge this and have some kind of reconciliation, what does it mean for a society to continue to live in denial with fear, shame and guilt, and for for a majority of the population of society to be living in that state? I wonder what that means for us as a society, not to confront this and deal with it, but to suppress it and not to have some kind of process that enables us to have a dialogue, have a debate, and come to terms with where we're at as individuals, but also as a society.
I suppose it's a little bit like therapy. We know that if we just kind of bottle up emotions, we bottle up feelings, they come out in different ways, whether that's in dreams or in how we relate to different people, our future relationships, all these things. So it seeps out in similar but different guises. And I think that that could happen here. Do we then get a learned behavior that we don't want to know, we don't want the truth, because it's too painful? So does it set a precedent that we start to kind of look away? I don't know what it means on a population. I suppose potentially what it means is that we hand over responsibility for ourselves and individuals and as a community to governments, to authority figures, because we don't want to deal with that. It's a little bit like thinking, I just want mum and dad to kind of look after me. You hope then, as long as you've got a good mum and dad, you're all good. But you also want to individuate and become your own person in your own right. You don't want to get to sort of 40 and think, I want to be looked after. You want to individuate. And so I think what we're doing by not asking these questions is stifling growth of the population. It feels that it becomes smaller, and we're abdicating difficult decision making to governments and to other things. And as I say, you just hope they're going to have your best interest. And I think that there's something so important in that. You use the word process, what's happened. People are too frightened to speak up and talk about what's gone on, so they don't process it. Yeah. And I think when people start to understand and feel differently, and they want to talk, if they are frightened of being labelled as something, they're not going to talk open and freely. And then the thinking doesn't evolve. So they might immediately come to, this is my position. But if they're allowed to speak freely and not have name calling, that position can shift quite a lot. But if you don't, then it stays stuck.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got words that are and words to me are so powerful. I get, people have said to me, you call me names for working with the vaccine injured. You must be, they're a bunch of anti-vaxxers, those vaccine injured. It makes no sense to me that you can call people who have taken a vaccine anti-vax, but it becomes a word that gets thrown out because people don't want to have a conversation. They want to shut you down. So when that happens, people get stuck and they don't move and they get entrenched in their position. And I think that's where we're getting, is lots of people entrenched in positions, not allowing each other to explore stories. And it is all about fear. So as we were saying, the people that are attacking people is because they don't want things to be different. They don't want their viewpoint of the world to move. And people that are stuck here, often they're frightened that, well, what's the reprisals for my job and all that. So I'm fascinated by mediation because I've seen it work wonders in terms of we're never going to move forward. And actually the first point, as you said, which to me is, I'm a therapist, this is what I do. We get people to talk. And, my favorite phrase was, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I think that, we need to sometimes just and listen more. And if we can do that, then we start to shift everyone's position.